Demuse, and you've entered Office Hours, a program where we invite luminaries to discuss and share insights from their world. These are one-on-one sessions, and they've been a huge success. I'm Lauren, partner and COO at Theory. I'm delighted to introduce our discussion today. And please feel free to ask questions in the YouTube channel. So I'll see if I can intersperse them along the way. So let me first do a quick introduction of our two guests. So Tom Toongoose, he's our general partner at Theory Ventures. This is our firm with 688 million assets under management, focused on companies leveraging technical discontinuities into go-to-market advantages. Tom's worked with leading data companies such as Looker, Mother Duck, Omni, Monte Carlo, many more. We're also joined by Barr Moses, CEO and co-founder of Monte Carlo, a data and AI observability company backed by Excel, GGV, Redpoint, and many other top Silicon Valley investors. Barr has worked at the cutting edge of data across a breadth of backgrounds, from VP of customer operations at Gainsight, management consulting at Bain, in the Israeli Air Force as the commander of intelligence data analyst unit. So as a trailblazer who spearheaded the data observability category, Barr has authored some of the most influential playbooks in modern data ecosystem. One of those is her pricing playbook, a journey that spans early go-to-market experiments to one of the most deliberate and well-executed transitions to usage-based pricing that we've seen. So I'm excited to explore this more deeply, and I'll hand it over to Tom.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. Barr, great to see you. Thanks for coming on. I'm so glad that you could join us.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Hey, Tom. Great to be here. This is so fun.
You and I have known each other, I think, since before you started Monte Carlo. And I remember going for a walk along the Embarcadero and telling me about this idea of data observability. And we've been lucky enough to watch you build this incredible business. And not just that, but really define a category. I think even your Twitter handle has something to do with what you're building. But in addition to many exceptional things that you've done, I think the thing that stands out, at least for now, most to me, is this transition that you guided the business through from contracts to annual contracts to daily revenue. And I think any pricing change is really difficult, but this was really a pretty fundamental, I wouldn't even call this a pricing change. I would call this like a strategic evolution of strategy. And I'm really grateful that you would come and talk to us a bit about and just educate everybody else about this exceptional thing that you've done. Maybe could you just set the stage of what the business was before and then what catalyzed this decision to move to a daily revenue?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a challenging but fun ride. I think we learned a lot. Hopefully made some more customers happy along the way. So yeah, just to set the stage, as you mentioned, so Monte Carlo is creating this category called data and AI observability, which means that we work with, at this point, hundreds of customers to help them make sure their data and AI products are reliable. So we work with data teams that could be like AI engineers, data engineers, analysts, et cetera, and they are responsible for building data and AI products. And we provide them with a platform and a solution that helps them make sure that what they're building is reliable so they don't learn about issues later. We started this category 5-6 years ago. This was not a category that was defined. And so at the onset of the company, what we really did was focus on identifying our customers, making sure we understand their pain, and building something that was valuable to them. And I think we started thinking about pricing maybe a couple years in. So we had a couple hundred customers, very strong NPS, world-class NPS, and customers are seeing increasing value over time from our product. However, there were 3 fundamental problems that were showing up in different ways, but I think the root cause was the same. The first is that the first problem, and to clarify, what was the pricing model we had prior, was a traditional subscription ARR model, if you will. So basically, a customer signed a contract for, say, $100K, and they would pay that $100K annually, regardless of whether they use the product a little bit or a lot or not at all. And that those models were based, the way that was priced or how that was negotiated was really based on integrations. The number of, in our instance, this was like data warehouses, BI solutions, ETL solutions, as well as users. So literally the number of data engineers, data analysts, AI engineers using the solution. Our problem with that model was that there was a fundamental discrepancy between that pricing model and the value that a customer saw. So you could be a very small data team, but see a lot of value from the product because maybe your business was really dependent on value, you're basically on data, you're selling data and AI, but we weren't capturing that as a business. And so basically we had no mechanism to align what we're charging with the value that the customer is seeing. So there was a lot of discrepancy as a result of that. And customers were unhappy with that. We were unhappy with that. The second fundamental problem we had was our customers were by and large used to buying in a consumption model. So they were working with companies like AWS and Datadog and Databricks. And this whole concept of negotiating the full price up front seemed ridiculous to them. Like, why do I need to go do all of that when I don't even understand how I'm going to use the product and deploy it? And we needed a way to make it easier for customers to get started. And I remember at the time I was speaking with, trying to get up to speed on what does best practices in pricing look like. And so I spoke with Bob Mulia, former CEO of Snowflake, and Ali from Databricks. And I remember vividly this moment where Ali was like, man, you're like selling like your Oracle in the 80s. There's a reason why the world moved to cloud. And I was like, yeah, like we are really doing a disservice for our customers. And this is the value of what cloud brings. Why are we not? Subscription is very wasteful and all of the risk is on the customer. Why are we operating in this model? So that was really the setting the stage, if you will. Yeah.
Incredible. And it's fascinating that he would, because we had 20 years of selling ACV. Insight was an ACV product. Salesforce was an ACV product. And I guess the part that I didn't appreciate until now is you're right. Most of the other products that Monte Carlo customers buy, they're typically usage-based pricing. And some of the friction that's associated with usage-based pricing is a lack of predictability or a lack of understanding of what it will cost. But in this case, particularly for that buyer segment, it's a feature. So
that's right.
Okay, so you have this moment where you recognize it's time not to be Oracle, it's time to embrace the cloud with pricing. And at that point, it must have been clear to you that this is pretty fundamental to the operations of the business, right? It's not just sales teams and quotas, but it's really the whole org that needs to change. Finance needs to figure out how to account differently. How did you start to create that plan to migrate the company from what had been for 3 or 4 years at that point to a completely different operational model?
Yeah, that process was and still is extremely difficult. And the reason is that there's really not a system that goes untouched across your entire company. There's literally not a single team that's not impacted by this. I think someone on my team said this. It's basically the ultimate bet on yourself and your team. Like, it's very clarifying in a sense because everyone's aligned on something. But because of that, it's extremely hard. And I'll explain what I mean. The first thing that we had to do was actually clarify ownership. So up until that point, I was owning pricing, which kind of sucks because it means that no one is really owning pricing. And that was difficult because there wasn't this motion of really, there was no person who was waking up every morning and obsessing about pricing day in and day out. And so the first thing was to figure out who should own it. And pricing ownership I've seen vary quite widely in companies, from marketing to product to sales to finance. There's really not a standard that I've found. And that was the first realization. The second realization is that it needs to be a disagree and commit model, because it doesn't matter who owns pricing. The other teams are going to be super upset about this, right? There was not going to be a world where someone was going to come up with pricing and the other functions were like, yay, this is awesome. We love it. By definition, the person making this decision was going to piss off everyone else, right? And so how do you operate in that world? How do you make the decision for who owns that? And so we actually did this. First of all, I'm really fortunate to work with, I think, the best team in the world. They all have a very high degree of trust in each other, and it wouldn't have worked otherwise. That's very fundamental. Like, we all had to respect each other's utmost professionalism and that we're doing the right thing for the company, for our customers, for our stakeholders. But that's not a given. The second thing is I actually asked each functional leader to write up the pros and cons of pricing being owned by each function. What are basically create a matrix that says, if it's being owned by product, here are the pros and cons. If it's being owned by marketing, here are the pros. Basically go through, and as a result, put yourself in my shoes and make a decision for what you'd recommend, and make that blind. So submit that to me without talking to anyone and not without showing it to anyone.
Wow, fascinating.
And everyone voted for product except for product. Product
wow.
So I was like, hey, product, guess what? So I think that brought clarity, right? Everyone was was really, first of all, understood that there's no easy decision. We're all going to have to choose one person that makes a decision. It cannot be a committee. And that person is going to have to create decisions that are going to upset others. And everyone is just going to have to disagree and commit.
And the product leader has to hold fast and sustain that justification. But that's fascinating that there was effectively unanimity outside of the product org.
That's right. I think once people actually sat down and thought about it and were like, what's the right thing here? And what are the trade-offs? And because there's no one easy decision, but I think for our business and our customers and our audience, that was the right thing. And it was a matter of bringing everyone together. So that was the first thing. And so the minute that we did that, okay, product owned that. Product made a decision to move to consumption, which means that for us, customers pay for what they use. Doesn't matter what they signed. We have, in our instance, there's a credit system that's based on monitors. And so the more monitors you deploy on your data and AI estate, the more sophisticated monitors you use, the more value and the more you pay. Pretty simple. Mm-hmm. Now, I'll talk about the changes that this had on go-to-market and on product. In go-to-market, Jordan Van Horn, sort of leading this change, basically rewrote the job description for every single team member. So every single team, from SDR to sales to onboarding to customer success to support, every team had to change their mandate. And we literally sat down, rewrote the job description, rewrote the customer journey. So onboarding was different, comp plans were different. Basically, like nothing was untouched in this instance. And that was, first of all, this crazy overhaul for the company, right? Now imagine being part of a team and we're like, hey, good morning, you have a new job. We actually rebranded the company. We called it MCCC, like Monte Carlo Consumption Company or something. We created hats that said consumption and sent them to team members. We created shirts. We basically had to really change our identity, if that makes sense. The fundamental difference is that now everyone thinks about the customer. So I'll take an example for how this impacts AEs in particular. I think that's one example. In the prior subscription world, the AE is primarily focused on getting the contract signed. And so you hear people will call in the last day of the quarter, hey, can you please get the stock inside?
I'll get you a discount. Yeah,
exactly. So you still need to get the paper signed, right? That's super important. But the focus for the team is now changes to actually, how do I get the customer deployed, adopting the product meaningfully, using it, and actually seeing value from it. And so there's this shift from focusing on signature to focusing on signature and value. So it's a different set of outcomes. It's a different set of skill set. The awesome thing about it is really everyone is aligned to what matters for customers, but it's quite a departure.
It is a huge departure. It's almost a fusion of, at least in the example that you talked about, a fusion of sales and success or solution architecture, because the AE is compensated on success, right? And so you have this alignment, like you were talking about, you have this alignment all the way through to the end of the, well, at least the first phase of the customer deployment.
Yeah, I agree. I think at the end of the day, if you have the fundamentals right, meaning you have a really good set of customers where the contracts is set up appropriately, meaning, you didn't oversell or undersell, right? You're bringing them in at the right terms, and then you make them really successful, the score will take care of itself. And so that means qualifying upfront for prospects and customers that have pain. That it brings you back to the foundation, right? You have to find people that you actually can help solve a meaningful problem for. You need to make sure they're set up with something that's fair. And you need to make sure that you're actually delivering value and changing what they do in a meaningful way. And if you're able to do that, then that increases the odds that you'll be a lot more successful with them.
You're right. I didn't even think about that, but basically reinforces MEDDIC or MEDPIC or BENT or whatever framework you're using up front, because otherwise, as an AE, you can spin a lot of cycles, actually sign a contract, and ultimately not see very much of a commission for a less than successful deployment.
Yeah, and from a customer perspective, it's not unheard of that you have customers that pay a 6-7 figure deal and never get deployed, never use the product at all. And in that sense, this model takes some of the risk on the company too, and forces the company to take part in the customer success.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you had the moment with Ali, you decided to transition the company, you assigned pricing responsibility to product, then there was a cultural shift within the business. with hats and basically an internal rebranding, right? Rewrote all the jobs descriptions, which is brilliant, right? Because basically you have to make sure that everybody knows what their goals are, what does success mean as a result of this new change. And then there's the board, right? There's this whole new land. And I remember receiving the board deck and looking at this daily revenue metric and thinking 15 years of education as a VC looking at ARR and ACV had been thrown out the window. So the finance org has to change, right? And you, or Monte Carlo now operates on this concept of daily revenue. Tell us a bit more about that. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I think in hindsight, I probably undercommunicated to the board how big of a change this was. I think it took us a hot second to understand that. I think the primary, look, this isn't just for our board. Like, we all had to unlearn everything that we do. And part of that is also unlearning how we look at metrics and rebuild all of our reporting. Maybe just to clarify the difference, in a subscription model, the day that you sign a deal, you have predictability. You know that you're going to have the value of the contract divided by 365. That's the amount that the company will get paid by our customer. And so you can speak in annual recurring terms. And people are obviously very familiar with that. In a consumption model, you don't know that. All you know is that customers will pay as much as they use. And so they might get started with some amount, and then the day after, they might turn it totally off, or they might 10x their usage. So it really gets tricky to understand where you're at today and where you'll be in the future, especially when you have no sort of prior data on forecasting. And so how do you operate in that world? I think the thing that we realize is that world of consumption, there was a lot of ambiguity, both because of the model itself and because we had no prior history. So it was hard for us now we have more sophisticated ways to forecast, obviously, but at the time, we literally had no historical data. And so the first thing that I thought was really important was to focus on us all on one single metric to rule it all. It was really clear that if we had multiple things that we were tracking, it would be too difficult because you'd have so many people running in different directions. And so the thing that we chose is daily revenue, which is literally, we look at all of our customers, what is their coverage in terms of monitors, what they're using. We multiply that by the unit price. That's how much they price. That's how much they pay. And that's how much we as a company recognize as well. And so we look at that every single day. We wake up in the morning and we see that. And that tells us if there's a customer that suddenly spiked up or spiked down, we can start learning what happened. I think at the end of the day, what was most important to us was to optimize for learning. And that would have been impossible if we did monthly or weekly revenue. We wanted to have a real-time understanding of what's happening.
And it also, if you have volatility within those daily revenues, it provides an AE or a CSM or whoever's in charge of the account a reason to reach out where there's a meaningful conversation to be had, in contrast to like the end of the quarter, let's do a review, right?
Yeah, 100%. First of all, I think in really healthy accounts, we know in advance that there's going to be an increase and a decrease, right? Because that conversation happens. Fast forward many months later, I can now tell you that with our best customers, we align with them on, let's say we work with a financial services customer and we identified 15 different use cases. One is a risk use case. The second is a claims processing use case. The third is a financial data. The fourth is a marketing data. We have a roadmap of use cases and we know, okay, we're going to start by these 3 use cases now and then 3 additional next month. And so in a sense, like, there shouldn't be surprises over time. And if there are surprises, you can reach out. But in the very early days, we had no idea why things are going up and down and why. And we needed to learn. Like, we didn't even know what levers we had. And so the focus on daily revenue forced us to look at that. Today, we obviously have a much more sophisticated understanding of how to make a customer successful through that journey. But that daily revenue is the North Star that allows us to every day look at that. And I can tell you, our team is happy and unhappy with the fact that everyone sees every single morning what's up and what's down. So it's fine.
Yeah, but you're right. It's this brilliant long-term alignment with the customer. To understand the customer really well, you need to understand what's on their roadmap, how to expand within the accounts. And it seems like you can get really the org actually be aligned with the customer in a way that ACV or contractual pricing, you're a little bit at odds, not fully at odds, but a little bit at odds.
I think this brings it closer. I'll give you another example from product. Obviously, this changes dramatically how you think about product too. But I think, again, just to give an example, I think on the product side, it gave a lot more clarity around what matters and what actually drives values for customers. So this is just a small example, but we actually realized that a couple of years ago, we set some default permissions for users. So users would log into the product and would have some default permissions. And this was set a couple of years ago, perhaps not with that much thought. We actually realized that is a serious inhibitor to people starting to use the product. Like it's actually, we set some default permission, but new users actually are prohibited from activating and starting to take meaningful actions in the product. And I don't think that would have been in our focus if we wouldn't have obsessed on this from a product perspective. And so something as simple as permissions actually starts to become really important when product also starts aligning on value in this way. For every single team, it brought the team closer to clarity and alignment with what the customer needs.
Makes sense. Barr, on that point, I have a question. There's three questions from the audience. The first is around defensibility and scalability of usage-based pricing, especially as customers demand more predictable costs. Is that a dynamic that you're seeing where as accounts grow, people are asking for more predictability, or is the initial supposition that the feature of usage-based pricing continues at scale?
Yeah, I think we have to be able to offer both, right? So specifically for enterprises who have sales cycles that are annual or 3-year or 5-year, we have to meet them where they are, right? And that's what enterprises need to do. They need to have a really tight budget from now for the next 3 years and next 5 years. And we have mechanisms that offer that. So we can offer you a pretty strong benchmark of what companies that are a similar stage, size, industry, and use case like you would typically pay for this. And we guide our customers to say, hey, here's an expected spend based on what we know about your use case, what we know about your industry, what we know about your stage. And so if you had to budget, this is what we would budget with you. So there's two models. There's a pay-as-you-go model where you can actually there's some unit price and you can just get started. And then there's a commitment where you actually get discounts for purchasing credits. And so you obviously get better rates for a longer term commitment. And so for many of our enterprise customers who are looking for that is definitely the favorable approach for them oftentimes.
And if you pay like an upfront commitment, I think a lot of public companies call them remaining performance obligations, RPOs. There's still the alignment between the sales team and the ultimate the customer, because the salesperson, you can't recognize the revenue until the usage of the product is there or the customers use the product. So you don't lose that alignment with a pre-purchase.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, great. That was Duncan's question. Vinicius asks, consumption-based pricing shifts importance to customer success instead of sales. Could you actually see the two functions merge? Is that something that's in the future? I mean, like Bob Muglia, no, it wasn't Bob. It was Frank at Snowflake who basically decided he didn't need a customer success function. The account executives own the account end to end. There are pros and cons of that model. How do you think about it?
Yeah, look, I think it varies. Here's the thing about pricing. It can fix a lot of things, like if you have a great pricing model, but it can fix some of the foundations. So if you don't have clarity on who your customer is and what they need and how you're solving their problem, like a pricing model won't fix that, if that makes sense. And so I'll just give you an example at Monte Carlo. Because we're creating a new category, data and AI observability, in a sense, customers are joining us on a journey to do something that they haven't done before. And so operationally, we need to be very prescriptive on how to use Monte Carlo, how to actually develop data and AI observability best practices. And so our customer success team plays a really important role in that. They actually help our customers create the category with them. Now, I think that is a different skill set that we are seeing today. For a different company that is on consumption-based model, it could work differently. Certainly, I know Snowflake doesn't have customer success managers. They do have post-sale technical people. However, Snowflake operates in a category that has existed for a very long time and takes a different level of operational maturity to work with. So for us, I think it's different. I would say that varies more by who's your customer and what is the journey that you need to take them on, and less on the pricing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Fantastic. Okay, I think we have time for two more questions here. One is from Alex. So as you're creating this category of data and AI observability, and you migrated to a new compensation model, how did the compensation or the comp model for the AEs evolve?
Yeah, great question. First of all, I'd say we put a great deal of thought into this, not just into compensation model, but also into, many of the changes that the reporting structure. We basically met CRO or COO or CFO, met with maybe a dozen or so leaders from across the industry, folks who have done this successfully, again, like AWS, Snowflake, Databricks, many others, and basically asked what are the keys to making AEs and more broadly folks very successful here. The thing that by and large folks as the most successful team members are those that focus maniacally on value. Those that focus on getting customers to value, like they'll do great. They'll do a lot of money and they'll do really well. But if you focus on something else, you're going to mess it up. And so we actually brought some of the leaders to speak with our team and to basically to do like a lunch and learn like how are you successful in this? And I think the team members who have embraced that have been the most successful. Like they identify amazing customers, they bring them on board, they set them up with the right contract, and they make sure they see value and they're very successful. I think tactically from a compensation perspective, we reflect what matters to our customers and to our company. And so the comp structure has adjusted to that as well.
Makes sense. Fantastic. Awesome. Barr, this has been a phenomenal overview. Like I said at the beginning, I feel extremely lucky to have had the privilege of working with you, creating this category, data and AI observability, and then watching you really transform the company from one operating model to another. And I have to say, I could not be more excited about the future for Monte Carlo. And the growth that's come as a result of this is just, it's really an inspiration. So thank you very much for sharing your time and your insights with us here at Office Hours. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
All right. Thanks, everybody.